Right now on the telephone line with me is legendary photographer, probably the most world-renowned rock and roll photographer ever, Janet Macoska. Hi, Janet.
Oh, you are so nice. And I haven't heard that Baki and the Vision song, like, forever. So that was fun.
Yeah.
I'm fine. How are you? I was listening to the music.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I try to bring out those old, great Cleveland classics, Baskerville Hounds, Baki and the Visions, Tom King and the Starfires, that people don't play a lot anymore. And I think some of our younger listeners have no idea that we had such great music in the 1960s.
Do you remember if Benny Orr, Benny 11 Letters, was he in Baki and the Visions early on, or what? I'm trying to think if he was in.
I think he was. I think he was. And if I am mistaken, I know my good friend John out there will correct me. I believe he was. And for some reason, we were just talking about that very recently. So I think you're right.
Okay, maybe he'll call in. But I just have a feeling that was his early band before he went into the Cars.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So tell me about your new book. Now, I looked at it online because I don't have a copy yet, but I will very soon. But tell me about it. How did it start? And, just give me the background.
Okay, and so you don't feel bad. Not many people. It's just come out. It's fresh, minty fresh off the presses. It came about because, there's actually, the good reason is because I've been shooting rock and roll for 40 years. That's a good reason to do a book, and I'll tell you in a minute why I hadn't done it before. But it also was occurring to me that there were people that you and I both know and who have been really important to music in Cleveland, and they never wrote a book. Jane Scott never got to write a book. Hank Lacani never got to write a book. Steve Popovich was in the process of writing a book. And when you have all these photos, these little babies here that you've given birth to, you know as a photographer that you want them to be seen. The difficulty is, and I've been a writer too, is to sit down at a computer and to pound out stories about yourself is really difficult. So I ran into a friend, Peter Chikarian, who is a really great writer in the city of Cleveland, has written for The Scene, for PD, Yahoo News, and he had, in fact, done a story on me for Yahoo News a couple of years ago, so I knew his style of writing, and I knew him. And I saw him at a concert last year at the Roxino, because I shoot all their live venue concerts. And Peter said, I asked him first, I said, Peter, when are you going to do a new book? And he goes, well, what about you? When are you going to do your book? And I said, well, I have difficulty I want to tell these stories, but when I sit down to write it, it's just not much fun. And he goes, well, good, then now I'll write it with you. So he did that. We sat down and we looked at photos, and he asked questions. I told stories, and he was able to just mold this thing with the photos kind of as I don't know, everything that holds everything together, but enough stories in my voice to tell the stories that I wanted to tell and to preserve the photos and the stories forever. And not that you asked, but I want to throw something in there.
Sure,
in that
sure.
It's not just about different artists. There's plenty of little sections or big sections with there's actually 340 photos in this book where you'll see photos that I've actually never had printed. I mean, I really went deep into the archives, 40 years of archives, and you see photos that I never scanned, never printed, of U2 in 83, Led Zeppelin in 77, 40 years of Joan Jett, 40 years of Bruce Springsteen. I mean, it really... It shows off artists, but it also shows off, there's a section on the World Series of Rock, the legendary World Series of Rock.
Yeah, I went to a couple of those, yeah.
Yes, and if you remember them, you weren't there. That's, that's a standard rock and roll thing. But it's true. Okay, so, and the Agora. I have a section on the Agora, Swingos, Celebrity Inn, a section on Jane Scott, a section on Cleveland International Records. Really, I try to hit a lot of, if you were growing up with rock and roll in your blood and, in your lives for the last 40 years, thank you, 40 years.
40 years, yes.
You're going to know about some of this, if not all of this, and it's meant to conjure up your own memories, kind of kickstart your own memories so that you have your own stories and you can look at photos and remember all those things that you did when you were growing up.
Absolutely. Not to digress, but actually Benjamin Orr was with the Grasshoppers who did a big song called Macoska. Yeah.
Yes.
I remember now. Yeah, I have the record, actually, Mod Socks. But
yes, thank you.
Sure. But getting back to your long lineage of great pictures over the years, and I've seen a lot of them, but I haven't seen this book, and I will shortly. But talk about Led Zeppelin when they came to Cleveland in 1977. That was a legendary concert at the Coliseum.
Well, I believe there was some damage done, but I wasn't there looking at the damage outside. I mean, 77... That show, I think it was 2 shows. They did 2 shows in April
so, yeah.
of 77. I only shot 1 show, but the thing about shooting back in the 70s is that you shot the whole show. Nobody put you in there for three songs and then out. So there was 3 hours of Led Zeppelin, and I just sat on the floor in front of the stage and shot. To my heart's content. I waited for pictures. I had black and white film. I had some color slide film. And it was incredible. I mean, it was incredible to have. That's Led Zeppelin before Bonham died shortly after that, and then they weren't Led Zeppelin anymore.
No, they weren't. They were not. Yeah. Any particular shots at any concerts that were extremely difficult to get that you're most proud of?
Well, I don't want to. I don't want to say they're all extremely hard to get. What they are is, and the reason that some people have this and some people don't. Why some people can play music and some people don't. I'm one of those people who can't play music, but because I'm such a fan in my heart, and that's where I come from. I wouldn't say they're all difficult. They're all
challenging.
You need there's like this internal mechanism, like a radar inside, and I get really quiet. And I'm watching the artist to see what kind of mannerisms they have, because it could all be fresh and new to me. I only saw Led Zeppelin once. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I knew of them, and I saw, film of them, but I had never been there, so I wanted to see their mannerisms. I wanted to see how the lighting guy worked a show, and you watch for that. You pick up rhythms in the band, in the lights, in where people go and how they act, and you just kind of work with it, and you have to capture it in a 60th of a second, and it's anticipation to see where they're going to go, what the move might be, how the music's going to hit a high note, what you're going to watch for when that happens, and it's really fun. It's like this little dance that you do with everything that's happening on stage. And one of those shots, just which your listeners might know about, there's a Jimmy Page shot that I have of him just coming right at me. Well, it looks like he's coming right at me. He's got his double neck guitar, and his sunglasses have slid down his nose so you can see his eyes right above his sunglasses. And that shot, he's picked out as one of his all-time favorites. It made the back cover. He picked it for the back cover of his photo autobiography that he put out last year. And when something like that happens, and out of all the photographers that went on tour with them and shot all kinds of photos, and you just wonder how this 23-year-old kid who was shooting one Led Zeppelin show, why that shot has made such a difference, and obviously made an impact on Jimmy Page. So, those kinds of things, those are just
precious memories.
And goosebumps. Yeah, you just get goosebumps, precious memories, and it just makes you smile that you've done the career, you've done the job, you've done the I don't know, it's not even work. You've been able to supply the visuals for the music that you love.
It's a read and react situation, it seems like. You get any great performer can get on a stage and get the rhythm of the room and be able to go with that. And the good ones are able to do it better than the average ones. Same with the photographers, I would imagine. You were mentioning that you just get the rhythm, the lighting, and you feel the concert out, where other people that are just average at it don't have the same sixth sense of that.
They don't have their spidey senses going. And,
well said.
And,
yeah.
And it really is that. And the truth is, there are photographers that are good at that, and it's kind of like you have to allow everything to happen and react. But there are other photographers, like Annie Leibovitz will say, because I've read it in her books, that she absolutely hates shooting live performances. She dreads them, and she's not any good at it. She'll tell you that because she's a studio photographer where she controls the whole situation. And I'm willing, and I love to be out there and just kind of be in the middle of that experience and get the images.
Yeah, I've seen you in action a number of times, most recently at the Chubby Checker concert back in January.
Yeah.
But that was a lot of fun, actually.
That was huge fun, and that's the whole thing about what I do. You know, I know people who have jobs who aren't happy about going to their job. I love my job. You know, I may not always be able to pay the bills at the end of the month, although I've gotten better at it. But I love my job, and when I'm doing something like that, and Chubby is a great performer, terrific individual. He was so fun to work with, and that show was so fun. So how can you help but get great shots with that?
Oh yeah, I could just imagine. Now let's go back in the Wayback Machine to the 1980s for just a minute. Now we come out of the 70s. Now the 80s were just a whole different animal, and I remember I graduated high school in the 80s, and I started DJing in the 80s, early 80s, and things really changed a lot. How did they change for you?
Well, you know, when you look at the World Series of Rock, for example, you've got 100,000 people in Cleveland Stadium for a show. It's apparent that rock and roll has become big business. You know, and the kinds of numbers that records were getting when they were selling in the 80s were just it had never been done before. So what happened was, I believe, that managers who would have been friends with the band or creative people were now getting replaced by lawyers and accountants and things like that who were telling the bands, we're going to take care of you. The way we're going to take care of you is we're going to keep everybody away from you and protect you. We've got to protect your image, and people are making money off of you. Believe me, freelance photographers do not make a lot of money. But it came to a place in the record business. By the way, those people weren't looking out for the bands. They just
I know. They're very, very.
Yeah.
They're narcissistic. I know.
Yeah, they were putting the money in their pockets. But it started the custom of, you know, having photographers shoot 3 songs, and then they physically removed you from the building, so you could not take any more photos. So it killed creativity for photographers and for bands, truthfully, because we're not out there to make them look bad. We're there to wait for the moment where they are at their best and at a peak where fans want to remember them in a certain way. That's what our duty and skill was, to do that. So we weren't making money. We weren't having creative fulfillment. And you never saw a band that ever sweated again. I mean, because you never got those kind of photos. Nobody was ever physically recording those photos anymore. A lot of photographers quit in the 80s. I found a way to transition into doing work for the teen magazines. You wouldn't have read 16 Magazine or Teen Beat because you were a guy, but little girls grew up on that stuff.
I remember. I mean, I didn't read it, but I know about it.
Okay, so I'd grown up reading those magazines, and I knew exactly what 12-year-old girls wanted, what kind of photos they wanted to see, and I'd been sending. There were some bands that kind of crossed over into that, like Styx, or kind of a band that 16 wanted. So I'd been working with some of those magazines, and as it was getting more and more restrictive, my editor at 16 said, Janet, I know you can shoot, I know you can do interviews and write, and she decided to put me to work shooting all these young actors that were on TV shows, or, you know, she just had a slew of things, and she was tired of traipsing across the country from New York to L.A. to do this 4 times a year, so that became my gig. So 4 times a year, I'd go out there for about 10 days at a time and shoot on the set of Home Improvement or different movies that were in production. I went to the Grammy Awards. I went to the American Music Awards. I mean, really, I was very busy shooting in an atmosphere where these teenagers, these kids, their moms, the studio, everybody knew I was coming. Everything, I was allowed to do my work, and I got paid well, decently, and I just kind of got away from rock and roll for almost a decade. I'd slip in an odd show or something, or cover New Kids on the Block on tour. I probably shot them in 10 different cities.
Wow, that was like 1990.
Yeah.
I remember.
Exactly.
Now, you've photographed a lot of great local bands like Rich Spina and Love Affair. They were very big in the early 1980s.
I didn't get, I would shoot them if, and this sounds, kind of mercenary, but I looked at shooting artists in terms of where am I going to sell this. It's not just shooting for the sheer fun of it. If you can't make some money on it, you shouldn't be at that show.
Oh, okay.
So if I'd shoot metal bands or hard rock bands for Circus and Cream, I'd shoot bands that had more of a teeny bop appeal for 16 or teen beat. But that's how I had to approach it. So I knew of Rich. I might have even shot in Love Affair, but it wasn't anything that was totally big on my radar. What was on my radar was the business side of me had to take care of the creative side of me, and the business side was saying, what are you going to do with these photos? Make sure you have a place to send these photos.
Now, sometimes you would look at a band and say, well, this is a rising band, and you'd have to make a decision on whether to go and shoot them or not. I mean, did you ever make, say, I'm going to go shoot this band, and they turned out to be incredibly big, and you gambled and it came out your way?
Well, the fun thing about working with 16 magazine is we were always doing that. My editor, Randy, and I would look at press packs that bands would send us. And, for example, I got a video and a press packet from the Backstreet Boys before they were just really young, and before they even had a contract in America. And their manager flew me down there for to Orlando for 3 or 4 days. And I went to all their houses. We went to Universal Studios. We went to numerous locations to build up a big library of photos because Randy and I had decided they're going to make it. And it took actually a bit of time before they actually made it. They went over to England or Europe, got a contract over there, and had to come back home to get a contract. So it might have been another year, a year and a half before they made it. But they counted on publications or freelancers to kind of hedge their bets or decide that there was something there that you saw or that you heard, and you knew they would make it. So, yeah, it has happened. It was actually fun to do that. There was a kid that came to Cleveland with a Warner Electro-Atlantic did a mini convention here in Cleveland, and they brought some of their artists in, and there was a young country artist named Brian White who played a couple songs. And as soon as I saw him and heard him, I went up to his manager. They thought I was crazy, and I said, you got a kid that can be in 16 magazine and Teen Beat. I said, that may not be what you're planning. You may have Grand Ole Opry kind of ideas here, but this is an audience that will just buy records and eat this up. And they did, and they even started at the magazine, the same company that owned 16 and Teen Beat and all these teen magazines, started a teen country magazine based on the fact that they could see that this was what was happening. Brian White was one. Tim McGraw had me come to Nashville and shoot photos of him. I mean, really, you were finding a whole young audience in country music that had not been served by George Jones and Tammy Wynette.
Yeah.
They wanted their own artists to listen to.
Yeah, I kind of wait to the old school and the new school, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But, Jen, you've done so much. You've done the... what was your first job? I mean, your first job that you shot? The first paying job was courtesy of
The sensational Alex Harvey Band, which...
Oh, yeah, I remember them.
Oh, yeah, was a Scottish band, big in Europe, big in the UK, Scotland. Came over here, and because Cleveland was such a unique town in terms of, because we had WMMS, we got to hear music that a lot of parts of the country didn't get to hear. And one of the bands that they played and that Cleveland embraced was the sensational Alex Harvey Band. And I shot them, the first time I shot them was at the Cleveland Agora. They were immediately booked 3 or 4 months later for the Allen Theater. And almost as immediately, I think on that time when they came back to the Allen Theater, I showed Alex and his manager some of the photos. And his manager was this big Scottish burly man, and he picked me up and he said, "You are family." And I said, "Okay." and I kind of got adopted. And Alex, said, he became kind of a mentor and said, "When you come to England, you will stay with my family." And he kept looking at the photos, and he goes, "You don't know how good you are." And I was 20 years old, so no, I didn't. I was just starting, and some of the pictures were pretty dreadful. But anyhow, he told his record company, Atlantic Records, that they needed to hire me to shoot the band's new publicity photos. That was my first paying gig, was doing the Alex Harvey Band's Atlantic Records publicity photos. They were switching from Polygram to Atlantic in '75. So that's the first paying gig. The first really cool paying gig.
Wow, that's a fantastic memory. Now, after that, and you progressed through the '70s, and before you came along, there was a guy named George Shubin, and you took the reins from George.
Well, I didn't.
No?
Because, I don't want to sound like I wrestled those away.
Oh, no, I don't mean it that way. I just mean it kind of faded in like that.
Well, yeah, George was the godfather. George shot all the upbeat show stills, and he photographed the Beatles and the Stones and the Who and Hendrix. The things that he photographed were just amazing. And I knew of him. I watched him. I watched Jane Scott doing her job, and I learned from both of them, and they were both very good friends. George still today, and Jane was a mentor as well.
Yeah, George is a good friend of mine too. I've talked to him many times, and he speaks very highly of you. So that's that's high praise.
He calls me his little sister. Yeah.
Can you share a story about Jane Scott? I only met her one time, and I hear a lot of wonderful things about Jane, and you were very close to her. I'd just like to hear maybe some inside stuff that we may not know about her.
Well, I think one of the most, people tend to know that Jane Scott would never say anything bad about any artist, although she had ones that she really liked, and you could tell in the article. But she was a journalist, so she wouldn't take a position in a review. She would interview people at the show if she wanted, if she didn't want to take her own stance, she interviewed people at the show to get their comments. But what was interesting is long after the show, and she would be one of the last ones to leave because she would be backstage interviewing the band, getting final comments, really doing the job, out probably almost every night of the week to see a show or two shows. So I'd be sitting here after the show, been home a couple hours, and the phone would ring at midnight. And it'd be Jane at her desk at the Plain Dealer typing away, and she'd have a couple questions, just to make sure she was accurate. She'd say, "Did you see when so-and-so did da-da-da-da-da?" And we'd talk about it. And what were they wearing? And what was that song when that happened? And she just would get her facts straight, and she'd be there until she was sure, totally sure that it was factually correct, and I admired that about her. So, and she'd always apologize about calling, and I'd say, "Jane, it's fine." I said, "You call back 6 more times if you want. whatever I can do. And she was just a really good lady and a very wonderful professional journalist, and probably because people think of her as some kind of wacky character sometimes, they don't give her as much credit for doing the wonderful job that she did. She was a very good, accurate journalist.
Yeah, she's very meticulous, and that's
yes.
And she'll be missed, and hopefully I think they're doing a documentary film about her. Is that correct?
I have heard this, but nothing has. Haven't heard about it lately. What I like and what somebody reminded me of the other day is, people who say Jane Scott should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, Jane is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If you go down to the lower level, there's a statue of her with those red glasses, red framed glasses, sitting on a bench with her notebook, waiting for you to sit down so she can interview you. And she would have loved that. It's perfect.
That is nice. I have seen that before. Janet, tell me about your website. Let's repeat that again, and let's go over the book one more time.
Yeah, because this is, like I said, a minty, fresh, newly published book. I guess the books are just getting into stores now. So if people want to, if they want to buy it and have me sign it, personalize it, and send it to you, it's much easier that way, I think, if you want to see the book. All you have to do is Google my name, and you'll see a few articles, which will give you, The Plain Dealer did a big feature. You'll get kind of a preview and a hint about what the book's about. But you can go to www.allaccesscle.com, and you'll find that you can buy a single book, or I'm even offering, ready for the holidays, a six-pack of books for family and holiday.
Nice.
Where you buy 5 and you get 1 free. I'm thinking ahead,
You're smart. You're very smart. and you're very kind. I appreciate your time, and we'll put this on my...
Well, you and I have been talking about doing this forever, and thank you for following up. Every time I see you, you've offered to have a chat on the radio, and I really appreciate that.
Anything to help you, Jenna, because, whenever I get to brush with greatness, I always like to, let the audience hear and, all about you, because you really deserved it. You've worked very hard, and the people that don't know your work should know your work, because I'm going to put some of it on my website as well, so people will have an access to it as, if they want to get the book there.
Well, great. I appreciate that, and I love the music you're playing. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you. I'm going to keep playing it till 5 o'clock, so hopefully you'll keep tuning in.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, Janet.
Bye-bye.
Janet Macoska.